Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here. This video is going to be a mix of some technique, some philosophy, and it's going to be a little bit sad. This is my 6th or 7th reshoot here, so if it's a little rambly and not perfect, my apologies, but I'm getting tired of trying to shoot this. Basically, the short of the long is that a very good friend of mine named Yo Goff passed away last week. Leo was the audio engineer for Yo Gotti and CMG, kind of doing the same thing that I do for Akon and Convict, and he has an incredible reputation behind him. He mixed and recorded Down in the DM, which was one of the cornerstone pieces for CMG to become what it is now. When I was first getting my footing in LA, Leo had moved out to LA at around the same time, and we actually ended up living together for maybe a little over a year, maybe a year and a half, something like that. And we ended up pushing our rigs together and creating this sort of like one super rig. And just over the course of that time, aside from being a great friend, he was really, in a way, almost a mentor because he has a number of years on me. And he showed me so many great things. He got me in as an assistant on a couple of Gotti sessions just to get me some credits, which was an amazing thing for him to do. He showed me how to solder. He showed me how to recap an SSL board. And as I was thinking about the things that I had learned from Leo, one of the techniques that I saw him do that technically he did teach me, but I never really got right, was the way he was using limiters on Mixbus, kind of the way that we more traditionally use compressors on Mixbus. And I thought that was really interesting because a lot of the times when you're out and about on the internet, people will tell you, oh, don't use limiters on your mix bus, save that for mastering, etc., etc. But Leo was using a limiter on his mix bus before sending in to mastering, and I wanted to show you what that technique looked like and my interpretation of it. And having thought about it for a little bit and sort of dug into it, I've started to understand what he was really doing with it, and while I still haven't quite gotten the technique down, I do want to show it to you guys. So I'm going to play a little bit of this record down without any of the compression or limiting in. Now switch on the limiter here. And you'll notice that the record feels a little bit fuller and a little bit bigger, but at no point does it feel like it's lost any punch, which I think is really like the idea behind a lot of our mix bus compression. So I'm going to pop in here, I'm going to give it a little bit of real-time AB, just so we can hear it in action, maybe get a clearer idea. So it's subtle, but it still works. Now, the reason it's subtle is because the only plugin I could find to emulate what Leo was doing this with was this particular plugin here, this TG mastering plugin. Basically, one of the reasons why I had trouble with it is because it was very specific to the Chandler Zener limiter. And so I'm only getting maybe about a dB and a half of level out of this, but he would be able to push it to 2, maybe 3, just because the hardware is a little easier to make this work. But the basic idea is that you set it into limiter mode, you set your recovery on 1 or 2 using the actual Zener. I set it to 3 using this one. And then you end up using the sidechain filter the same way that you would use a compressor to kind of balance out how the low end is affecting the limiter. Now, here's the thing. I've tried getting this to work with limiters specifically in the box, and I've found that it really doesn't work. The limiters tend to soften the transients too much, even when it's only doing 1 or 2 dB of reduction. So I started thinking about it and realized that the clue to actually getting this to work was in the word Zener. And I realized that, oh, okay, so this is actually a diode bridge compressor being used as a limiter. Let me take a look at some of the specs and see how this actually manifests. And what I found is that while the compression curve is extremely steep, it's got a little softness to the knee, but overall it's pretty hard knee, but the ratio is like 50 to 1, like it's a really killer ratio. But the attack time is still around 3 milliseconds, 3 to 5, depending on what you're hitting it with, and that's pretty slow for a limiter. So what's really happening is this is acting as kind of a soft limiter. So that got me to thinking, maybe there is a way to make limiters work on Mixbus. My typical Mixbus approach has been slower attack times, faster release times, and then using lighter ratios, right? And then you kind of use it for movement, you kind of use it for punch, and that's worked really well in the world of rock, I think, and it works really well in the world of hip hop too. But this approach, I've been noticing, can do some really, really cool things in the world of hip hop. And so it probably translates to anything that uses program material, so EDM, pop, any kind of stuff like that. So I started recreating this technique using different compressors to see what kind of results I would get. So I'm taking the limiter out here, and I've got a whole bunch of compressors in line here. I've got an SSL emulation, I've got a API emulation, I've got the Ozone Vintage limiter, I've got this Vertigo thing, I've got FG Red, I've got the Lindell. I'm going to go through these. I'm going to show what some of them sound like, but basically I hope what you get from this is you get inspired to try this on your own with whatever devices you have, and see if it can work for you. Because we're told so much to leave limiters off of the Mixbus, but here's an example where not only does it work, but it was being used repeatedly by somebody who is getting consistent gold and platinum records for one of the most successful rap labels out there. So let's start with this SSL emulation right here. So this one's pretty subtle. It adds a nice little bit of tone and some roundness around like the 400 hertz range, so I like it. It's definitely one of the subtler ones. Let's try the API emulation here. So it gets really punchy, even at very fast attack times. You'll notice the ratio here is at infinite to 1. So that's pretty crazy. I've never even tried that on a compressor before. Very, very punchy sound. I don't know if it was perfectly level matched. It's kind of hard to tell, but definitely a cool tone to that. One of the ones I wanted to try was just this Ozone Vintage limiter. I wanted to see if maybe this Vintage limiter worked a little differently than like a brick wall digital limiter. It turns out it does. And that one ends up being one of my favorite, actually, to be honest, and I would never have even thought to use this as like a Mixbus compressor. To me, this always fell into the category of limiter, and yet it just sounds really good. So yeah, I will absolutely annoy my mastering engineer by putting a limiter on my record, for sure. This one, I believe, is an emulation of the Pendulum, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, tone-wise, this is easily one of my favorite. I love the way this sounds. It has this nice, like, glossy polish to it, which I think is great. The FG Red, which was for a very, very long time my go-to in the box compressor. Super punchy, even though I've got this very fast attack and the ratio is up at 10 to 1. It's just something that I really wasn't trying. And then I started thinking about it. I was like, maybe there are other diode bridge compressors that can do something similar. So maybe you want to really, really do it the way that Leo was doing it, but you don't have that TG mastering thing from Waves. Well, if you have a 33609 emulation, that's also a diode bridge circuit that has a limiter in it, or any kind of Neve compressor. Typically speaking, most of the Neve stuff is diode bridge circuits, and here's one from Plugin Alliance, this Lindell 254E, where I'm really not using the compressor side at all. I mean, technically I need to have it in to get this gain to activate, but the threshold here is all the way up, so all the reduction that I'm getting is from the limiter, before and after. That might be my favorite one, to be honest. I mean, that one sounds beautiful as soon as you turn it on. It's a tough call. They're all giving me something good in different ways, so maybe I might even try stacking some of them and see what happens there. Uh, but I want to cap this off with a couple of thoughts here because I'm not really showing you the craziest thing in the world. Basically, what I'm trying to show you is that you know when you listen to internet advice, and this is coming from somebody who gives a lot of internet advice, don't take it as sacrosanct because the real world of working professionals, like my friend Leo, who is doing it every day, day in, day out, they're not paying attention to the internet advice. They're finding the things that work, and then they're doing the things that work. And that's really all there is to it. So using a limiter, if it sounds good, then you work with it. The only reason why the internet advice for leave the final limiter off really is salient is because the final limiter is usually something that's being used in order to get the record to be louder, not to make the record sound better. But if it's something that makes the record sound better, then we want to leave it on. Usually the final limiter is making it sound worse, and we're just tolerating it because it's making it sound louder. Another point that I want to make, by the way, is, Leo moved out of LA maybe a couple of years back, but he would come into LA to work pretty often, and very frequently he'd call me up, let me know he was in LA. We'd try to make plans to get together, and a lot of the times we just couldn't because we're both working so much. And if you're somebody who's really in the trenches of whatever they're doing and you're working day in, day out, force yourself to go the extra effort and make the extra time to get together with people because it's pretty easy to take this stuff for granted. And you shouldn't, because honestly, there's always going to be another record, but there aren't always going to be other friends.